Hey, how the hell is it going? It's Rich. Welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to do some studies of Frazetta and David Finch, and we're going to talk about the difference between medical anatomy and artistic anatomy, and what the difference is, and what are the key points to dynamic anatomy, and how to enhance your drawings and paintings to make them even better. Okay? Dynamic anatomy is something we all struggle with, and I cannot wait to tackle this with you guys. Comment below what you want to see next. I'm very excited about this. Let's get into it. Let's talk real quick about what is dynamic anatomy versus regular anatomy. You know, what's the difference? The dynamic anatomy is basically artistic anatomy. And the knowledge of artistic anatomy, as Burne Hogarth says in his book, knowledge of artistic anatomy does not rule out knowledge of medical anatomy. One enhances and refines the other, as the above evidence shows. Like he said, artistic anatomy versus medical anatomy. That's the difference. And that's what we're talking about. So, dynamic anatomy can be summarized as more beautiful, more appealing, visually appealing. So, that's why, you know, if you look at Frank Frazetta drawings or generally drawings, you could probably look at it and be like, that looks anatomically correct, that looks realistic. Doesn't look like a cartoon, you know, but it's not. It's not medical anatomy. It's not as accurate as possible, but it fools the eye to thinking it is, because it's not only what we see, but they added to it what they wanted to see. So, yeah. So now I'm breaking down a David Finch drawing, I believe, of Batman, and it's basically a study. And I kind of wanted to explain the process here. Obviously, first blocking in my shapes and getting the gesture down. And some of the key anatomy points that I want to note for later. There are certain body landmarks that are on everybody. And it's usually where the muscle dips in and meets the bone. You have it in your pelvis. There's a landmark. Everybody has it. Elbows, wrists, landmarks. But yeah, so I'm going in with a pen, finding my definite shapes, my definite lines, and I'm putting those down. Gotta remember, dynamic anatomy, meaning artistic anatomy, means making it more beautiful, I guess, more appealing, what you want to see. It's not going to be super consistent if you were doing a turnaround, I guess. It might change from one view to another based on what you want to see. So I think that's kind of interesting. But it also means knowing your medical anatomy, knowing how the muscles move in certain poses, you know, what's load bearing, what's not, what's going to be stretching and what's going to be bulging. Like a bicep, if it's curling and lifting something, it's going to be bulging out, versus how in this pose it's stretching because it's stretched out. Stuff like that. And it means knowing its contrast of shapes. Certain muscles will be wider and bigger at certain points, and as opposed to where they pinch in, like the bicep meeting the shoulder, the bicep and the tricep meeting the shoulder. Look at that, it pinches in considerably. You wouldn't see that on an average person, or probably any person. But this is dynamic anatomy, and we get to do what we want. So this isn't something that I usually do, but in studies like this, and I really want to learn and demonstrate to you guys as well. So I'm shading, breaking out the shader. Wouldn't normally. I kind of like the look of hatching, but doing this pencil shading on an ink line, I think looks really great. I think it demonstrates the keys of dynamic anatomy like I want it to. There's my blending stump. Toning it all out. I'm working with a 0.9 pencil, and there's a Tombow eraser. It's really, really thin eraser. Allows me to get very detailed. There's my white, I don't know, brick eraser. It's huge. So go look at your favorite artists, find out how they do dynamic anatomy. Take what you want, leave the rest. It's not stealing or swiping. There's nothing. They stole it and swiped it from someone else too. There's nothing else that's left original, unless you're going to swipe in an original way. You know, and I don't know how you would do that. The Renaissance painters all swiped it from somewhere else, you know. Hard to be truly original. You can try to do things in a new way, and combine different styles to create something new. But even then, it's not entirely new. So, yep, you really got to study anatomy. This isn't really an anatomy study. I'm not breaking down all the muscles for you guys, but I'm demonstrating how I would use dynamic anatomy and how I use it in my own drawings. You just got to know which muscles to emphasize and which to not, and how and where to shape them certain ways. And here I go with a straight-on anatomy drawing. Not medical anatomy. This is artistic anatomy, dynamic anatomy. But it's a straight-on shot. And, you know, the best way to... Here's a given. Here's a given for dynamic anatomy. Giant chests. Giant chests make the rib cage even bigger and the waist smaller. Okay, and you can even make the pelvis a little smaller, but then have the legs absolutely jacked. You know, that's really the key to dynamic anatomy. And you can do it in different ways, emphasizing different muscles and muscle groups. If you look at certain artists in animation, they emphasize different muscles on their characters than a comic book artist would. And some of that has to do with the practicality of animation and designing characters that are easily animated. But I steal stuff from them too, and I'm not in animation. I'm trying to do a comic book. Jeff Wamister, he's director for some Marvel cartoons. His designs are great. I like how he draws chests. He has a very interesting shape for the chest, and it's really from him that I figured out that the chest really intersects into the shoulder and bicep area. He makes his pectoral muscles even wider and makes them look less bulky than someone like Frank Frazetta or Jim Lee. Theirs kind of looks more square and super bulky. He makes his characters seem more lean and slender by widening it out. It's really interesting the way certain shapes, if you just alter them slightly by making them wider or whatever, it can affect how the entire character looks. Alright, so remember, dynamic anatomy just means artistic anatomy. So figure out your artistic anatomy, which means studying medical anatomy, the scientific anatomy, how those muscles work. Don't break it down to the individual forearm muscles. You don't need all that. Okay, there are certain muscles that you can see, certain muscles you can't. Some of them just follow the bone. Okay, just study proportions, study anatomy, then figure out what you want to see. And that's where dynamic anatomy is. Boom. All right, click that thumbs up button, subscribe, ring that bell for notifications.